So for those who were here last year, you're probably glad I'm not going to be talking about American football. So this talk is about moving beyond point-in-time security. It was called a different name when I started writing this, but it's not politically correct, so we're just stuck with this. So this is me, multiple careers in my life. I've been an engineer from when I started from mechanical engineer, then went into civil engineer, then went into IT, and now I'm in security, bits of everything through. And I work for this organisation, GBG. I'm going at speed because I've got 15 minutes. So GBG provide lots of services to many organisations. Come and speak to me afterwards and I'll explain what we do. And if you want a true answer, Phil's over there, who's my boss, he'll give you a better answer. So, hands up if you've heard of the Titanic. It's going to be an interactive one, this. If you don't have your hands up, then where have you been? Okay, so keep your hands up, keep your hands up. Knowing what you know about the Titanic, who would get on the Titanic now? Honestly? Someone still got their hand up? Oh, few people, brave. So, the Titanic. It's got a couple of slides here to explain how the Titanic sinking actually was compliant with all the regulations at the time. So we have this here. At the time, the Merchant Shipping Act of 1894 was the legislation that stated the number of lifeboats that they should have on all ships. The only trouble is, there's an important word in here, it's merchant. Merchant is the transmit and sales of goods, not the shipping of people. And it states here that anything over 10,000 tons needs to have 16 lifeboats. So the Titanic was compliant. It stated, and it had 16 lifeboats. So it was compliant. But we all know that there wasn't enough lifeboats for the people on board the ship. So they were compliant. That's fair enough. But the worst part is the Titanic actually had an unladen weight of 46,000 tons. 4.5 times the weight that the maximum was. So never mind the fact that you haven't got enough lifeboats based on that. It's 4 times the amount. So the legislation wasn't set up to cover the Titanic and the shipping of people. And what the Titanic actually did is put 16 boats in, but it was originally designed to have 32 lifeboats. So it would have had more lifeboats to get those people off, but it only put in the 16 that was compliant and then 4 emergency collapsible boats. Suddenly you're thinking, it was compliant. So we all hear the fact they didn't have enough lifeboats, but it did, because it was compliance. It also had the risk mitigation. It had the Marconi wireless telegraph, which was used to communicate between all ships. So in the event of something wrong, they would use this to send messages out. But unfortunately, it didn't need to be manned. So somebody would send out a message, nobody might read it. There were 7 messages went out stating that there are icebergs in the areas, but nobody saw them. Or it's believed that nobody saw them. But imagine this part. This one really gets to me. It was often used to send personal messages. So when you've given phones to your kids and they've got Snapchat, what does it immediately do? They send a snap to everybody in their address book, and everybody sends a message. These people going on a boat for the first time, traveling all the way across the Atlantic. What are they going to do? Hi, I'm going on holiday, or I'm traveling over to there. They'll send these messages. So when you're looking at an issue, these people are reading these messages, have to read through all that lot. And even worse than that, there's only one channel. So every boat in the area is sending it. And these signals are going up to 900 miles in distance, which is huge. So you can imagine how many actual ships are sending these messages, because they're across the board, everywhere. And we know these seven messages set out because it's actually in the reports that was actually created as a result of the sinking of the Titanic. But even worse, they also did risk acceptance. They kept the boat in an area that they knew were icebergs because they had these designed paths. Because they know other ships were in the area. If they sent the boat down here, then we know the ships come and collect them. So they decided it's safer to send the boat in this area where the actual icebergs are, because if something went wrong, another ship will be nearby. Lovely idea, but unfortunately, that signal goes 300 miles. So the next ship might be 300 miles away. Carpathia, which is a ship that actually came and rescued the people from the Titanic, traveled at 14 miles an hour at maximum speed. So 14 miles an hour means it takes, if it was at 300 miles, will take them over 20 hours to arrive. The Titanic sunk with 4 hours. So not a chance of arriving. It's lucky that the ship was in the area, but it was an accepted risk. We also have the fact that they've never trained the people to actually deal with the incident. So how are we expecting our people to deal with the incident at that point? We've got to train them. We also have the fact that when the ship hit the iceberg, it carried on going for 10 minutes because they actually didn't know how bad the issue was. They then went down in the hold and looked at it. So the incident response did what we would do, find out what's happening. It took them almost an hour before they started to load people on the ship, onto the lifeboats, because they are going through that process. We have the same scenario. This is not new, what we're dealing now regarding our incident response. It's exactly the same thing that they did on the Titanic. But the worst part is we learn from our mistakes, and we look at what's happened previously. So we see these ships here, if anybody can see us. I didn't know the font was going to be so bad on this screen. But 1904, SS Cleland launched 3 lifeboats. What they've done is exactly the same on the Titanic. They put the women and the children on the lifeboats. And they lowered these 3 lifeboats. What happened is heavy winds and waves, lifeboats flipped over, everybody drowned. Unfortunately, the boat then stayed afloat for 7 hours, and they was able to actually send a tug to go and rescue the people that are on the boat. So all the men had watched their women and children die and were then rescued. So people are nervous getting on the lifeboats at this point. The same things happened in other impacts. This one here, they sent out 6 lifeboats. 6 lifeboats went out, and only 9 people on those lifeboats survived. So why would you want to get on that lifeboat? Even worse, in 1909, a boat got hit, and it was able to stay afloat for 12 hours. So everything was designed on the fact that the Titanic would be a lifeboat. It would hold people and make it safe for them to arrive. So it was compliant. So knowing all this stuff, the fact that it's compliant, they followed all the regulations at the time, who would still stay on the Titanic? I'm looking at you guys over there, get your hand up. You wouldn't, would you? But this is what we are expecting, the fact that when an organisation says to us that they are compliant with these policies and procedures, we're taking that as being that they're going to be safe. But we learn. So this talk is about compliance versus cybersecurity, and we've got to bring it together and make sure we are doing not the minimum for compliance, doing the best. Titanic had 32 ships. If they could start unloading those ships straight away, they would have saved way more people. If they would have made sure that they'd been closer to the Carpathia and it wouldn't have taken 3 hours to arrive, they would have actually been able to use those lifeboats to ship people from one to the other, and the potential would have saved everybody. But they took it as a risk-based approach and chose worst-case scenario was not going to happen. So we have PCI. So there's a bit of slating off of PCI here. I actually love PCI, but I'm going to point out some inadequacies if you don't take it to the best standards and you do the bare minimum. So PCI has only been updated 4 major times. So we're now on PCI 4. And it took 11 years to update. But during that time, if we look at the last time it was updated, there's only 5,000 vulnerabilities found per year and registered with MITRE. Last year alone, in the first 3 quarters, there was 29,000 vulnerabilities created. And yet, we were still using and allowed to use PCI 3. So why is it so slow? And it's not just PCI, it's also ISO 27001, where it's taking average 7 years. Whereas we look at the technical frameworks, like CIS, they're moving much faster and updating to suit because they are having to modify to suit the technical controls. And the same goes with OWASP. So why is it these compliance frameworks are running slower than the technical controls? So as I said, I'm going to slate a bit of PCI off, but I like PCI. So PCI, in 2018, they brought out an update and said that systems, antivirus systems, must do periodic scans. And we've got, at the time, Sentinel-1, who's not outside, but specifically Sentinel-1 in this scenario, Sentinel-1 were, as we see at this point, a visionary regarding AV. But unfortunately, they had to modify their product to bring in this periodic scans. So hands up if you use Sentinel-1 here? I'm not a salesperson, so it doesn't matter if you're not. But anybody who's using Sentinel-1 knows that their speciality is not to do a standard scan. They're looking for issues with what's running on your system. And as a result, they had to modify their setup. And it's only this year, 7 years after they did that, that actually PCI updated. So up to that point, you had to do regular scans. This was what Sentinel-1 was compliant with back in 2017. Password policies. By the way, who's here PCI compliant, or whose organizations are PCI compliant? So you guys have been through this. 2018, did it enforce a password policy that stated you must reset your password every 90 days? Isn't that a pain for your staff? They're having to constantly think of a new password. But the problem is the NCSC in 2018 said, do not do this. But PCI in 2018 was saying you must do it. So we were having to make our systems not what the government was saying is the best way, most secure thing, because we were creating things to suit what the compliance is saying. And it only took them again until last year to do this and update it that you can actually use your behavioral analytics to actually get that sorted and take that into account. And this problem with this is it starts creating these silos that we're building in our networks. So we'll have a network that is for PCI, a network that is for FedRAMP, a network that is for ISO 27001. That's making it complex for everybody and more costly. And the problem is we have these woolly figures. So this is actually a sheep. You can only just see it, his face is here. But we have this term up here in the north that says woolly. And this is the problem. We have these woolly figures. So I'm going to ask any of you on this one. How often should we do a pen test inside PCI? So some guys over here said they did PCI. How often should you do it? Should it be once a year or monthly? Once a year. So we're then saying, I've tested 364 days ago, all were good. Would you do that with your cars? Would you go to the MOT and have your tyres tested and have the MOT come along and go, yeah, you got big enough treads, and then come say, when you get pulled up by a policeman, go, it's fine, it's on my MOT. See, I've done 80,000 miles, I'll be all right until next year. You wouldn't. That's what we're doing with pen testing. We are sitting on and demonstrating that we're safe based on a thing that could be almost a year old. When should we do a pen test? This is very woolly. When we put a new system in, or during a software upgrade, you can actually put this and say, well, it could be either, or it might be neither, because it's your opinion of when the major change is. So it's any significant change. Neither of those could be a significant change. A methodology, what should you do? A limited scope or a black box? I'm asking the same guy again. Go on, what limited scope or black box? Which one should you do? Oh, I've got a clock on. Pick one or the other, Sarah's up. This one, I'm going to choose one for you. Limited scope. Yeah? It's not. It is when you do an industry standard accepted procedure. So whatever we say, we could say we're the industry. We could all say, actually, you could just send a packet to it and it'll be all right. There's nowhere on the internet that states what that means. We also have, on PCI, it states that these are qualifications. Which of these qualifications must you have to do a PCI audit? I'm going to answer this because it took ages to get the last answer. So these are all proper qualifications that are mentioned inside the pen test document for PCI. But it then says, we don't accept any of these, we're not actually validating any of these, so therefore, none of them really matter. So it's absolute garbage. If you do bare minimum, I could actually say, I've done a pen test before, so it's good enough. PCI will accept it. So, when should you do training? It states, upon hire, or at least once a year. So you could do training once a year. It says, included but not limited to phishing and related attacks, including social engineering. Well, phishing to me is social engineering, so I only need to do one. And then it says, periodically, frequencies up to your own discretion. Woolly. What does it mean? So how can you trust the organisation that says the PCI when all this is garbage? So you might as well just say that find the fish and you've been trained for a year. So who would send this fish out to your team? It says, look, it's from my Gmail account. You can take it if you want. But it's coming out and it says it's not a fish. But it states, send a fish alert. That actually is an acceptable fish under PCI. Because you trained the people saying that's not from the business, and you told them how to report. That is acceptable in PCI. So, I asked the question when I last did this talk, and I asked the question, when we do fish training, how many people would we be willing to accept and say to our board have fallen for a fish during our fish testing? And they came back and said 20%. And I asked it to the audience, and it was like going 100%, and I got to 20, and the majority were up. But then I asked this question. How many would you actually would you be willing to accept fell for a real fish? 0. So why are we choosing this arbitrary figure, 20%? We should be targeting trying to train everybody so they don't fall for a fish. But we don't do that, because what we actually do is we send out, and we're doing a tick box exercise like this. So, pen test. When we do a pen test, we put in the bench. She's moving closer. So, 3 minutes. We do a pen test. We'll see. I'm going to do what Holly did earlier on. Right, so I'm going to go at speed. So, pen test. We might as well do this. We're reporting on doing a test on a very small area of our environment. That's not acceptable. Not for me. We should be testing everything and making sure everything's safe. We're testing it out of hours. We're doing a test when nobody's using the system. So what we're finding out by doing that? We're not doing brute force attacks. We're taking the impact out of it and we're just saying to them, don't do this because we don't want to do SQL injection. These are all things that an attacker would do, but we're just removing these. Fish training. We know that it doesn't work because whoever set up fish training in their organisation, we have to put whitelists in to get it coming through. So we're training people on fishes that actually wouldn't be delivered. And then bollocking them, sorry to swear, bollocking them because they fail for it. So all they're doing at that point is not trusting our systems. So yeah, we're just leaving them to be attacked by sharks. And we're doing training. And they're just saying, you need to complete this training, and put it in the background and not do it. So yeah, why is it all going to change? Last slide. Why is it going to change? Because these regulations coming at us, DORA, NIS2, are both online now. CRA's coming at us. All of these are saying that we must demonstrate that we're doing security testing and we're doing security controls constant. And let's get it right. That one there, if you're providing software, in 2 years' time, that's going to kick you in the butt. So get in place to start looking. So yeah, expect to fail, because if you don't, it'll be bad.